Hello and welcome. You're watching One India News. This is our weekly show, the Global Chit Chat, where we speak about the top developments in geopolitics in the recent week with our guest and expert, Mr. Tridivesh Singh Maini. Hello, sir. Welcome back to our show.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Sir, we'll be speaking mostly about our neighboring countries today. So, let's start with Sri Lanka. We know that for the past week, Sri Lanka has been undergoing the effects of its worst economic crisis in decades. And the president, he has refused to resign. And let me point out here that Gotabaya Rajpaksha belongs to the Rajpaksha clan, who have been forming the Sri Lankan government. This is the third generation that they have been forming the Sri Lankan government, the family. And yet, seeing the dilapidated condition of the economy, he is refusing to resign. So, how do you think the country will recover in such a situation? Do you think that any external help, for example, help from China, which China is aiding both Sri Lanka and Pakistan here? So, do you think that any external aid, especially from the South Asian countries, would actually help them to recover, or how do you think the country or the nation may actually recover this crisis?
So, couple of things. First thing is you need to look at, I think you've very rightly drawn the link. There you can draw some parallels. Of course, the situations are slightly different. We'll come to Pakistan after that. When you look at Sri Lanka, there are a few things which you need to bear in mind. The first is that the current slowdown is a result of, one, obviously dependence upon China. But not only that, it's also a dependence on tourism. The Sri Lanka depended a lot upon revenues which accrued from tourism. Now, naturally, tourism was hit significantly by the COVID-19 pandemic. So that was one thing which you need to bear in mind. Secondly, obviously, now when Sri Lanka was seeking assistance from China, the model which was followed was an infrastructural. The focus was on developing infrastructure. Right now, many of these projects are ornamental in nature, or they actually they're in sync with China's strategic interests in the context of South Asia and Southeast Asia broadly. So like India has the US came up with the free and open Indo-Pacific. You do know about the Chinese policy also about sort of encircling various countries. Like if you look at South Asia, if you look at Southeast Asia and all that. So what these countries in South Asia, many of them don't, even in Southeast Asia, Myanmar as well, a lot of the infrastructural projects, some are obviously meet China's economic objectives, but also strategic objectives. Now, the realization is dawning upon many of these countries that there are problems. So Sri Lanka, for instance, this economic crisis. Now, what are the issues apart from, so let's say, suppose, if we assume that China is the only factor, we also need to bear in mind a couple of other things. First, excessive dependence upon any one source of income. So, your model is wrong, infrastructural, fine, but you've not even looked at any other sectors. Now, the other thing which you need to look at is can you have any template? Can these countries which have failed to strike a balance between China and other countries have any template? Now, in South Asia, the closest template which you can get in economic terms is Bangladesh. Bangladesh to balance its economic relations, even if strategically and in security terms, there are arguments that Bangladesh is much closer to China, is very dependent upon it. But it has, if you look at economic relations, it's cultivated strong ties with Japan, strong ties with India. Even it has not really been averse to being part of the free and open Indo-Pacific. So you need to have a template in place. That's the first thing. That what model can countries in the developing world follow? That's the first thing. Second is when you blame China, that that dependence upon China leads to a debt trap, it leads to a strategic trap. All that is good, but do other countries have an alternative? Now we've been speaking, for instance, when you look at the Indo-Pacific, there has been talk about helping out countries in South Asia, and like I said, Bangladesh is sort of willing to get on board. The US has also said Sri Lanka is an important component, but there is no real economic vision. Individually, countries may be doing things. So India has provided assistance. Japan, in the past, in terms of overseas development assistance, it was amongst the highest lender at one point till China actually came in. So you need to have, countries also need to have an alternative model in place. And of course, then as they, when you build up an economic model, you also need to, Sri Lanka has had its fair share of problems, but you also need to have a holistic model. You can't just depend upon one sector. So obviously, it's tempting to depend upon tourism because the service sector creates jobs really fast, and you believe that that would lead to some other. So, for instance, they may be looking at IT, they may be looking at other things. Then obviously, apart from these problems, the Russia-Ukraine crisis as well, because it has disrupted its economy. If you look at Sri Lanka's trade linkages, for instance, with Ukraine, so that reasonably not, I mean, obviously not, they're not the primary trade partners or anything, but quite important. So that has also disrupted, that has also been an unforeseen sort of disruption. So you've had 3 or 4 things together. You've had obviously the dependence upon China, the foreign exchange problems of building up over a period of time, the sudden dip in tourism, which led to problems that has happened because of COVID-19. And then sort of everything has sort of happened together, and you don't really have any alternatives. And China is not assisting Sri Lanka at this point of time. So these are some things. The final thing I would like to say is also that there has been, when you have domination. So, for instance, the Rajapaksa family has been the one which has been spearheading the foreign policy. In between, there was a change of government, but that government actually tried to diversify. They were looking at improving ties with Japan, with the US, with India. Whereas the Rajapaksa, though this time in this tenure, they have also said that they need to strike a fine balance, and they were looking to improve ties with India. And India has provided assistance, but that the political system domination by one family, that has also because you can say that it's not that representative, and now people are coming out in the open and actually criticizing what is happening over there. So I think that also points us to the fact that being in sync with the public opinion is very important, and economic crises don't take very long. I mean, it just builds up. So these are lessons, I think. An open, a transparent system which is in sync with the ground realities, which is responsive to the people, is essential. And probably many of these countries also, they look at China as a model, even in terms, because you see the Chinese model has been more attractive, especially in Southeast Asia countries, who openly say it, that it's more efficient in terms of delivery on infrastructure, on economy, but it doesn't work everywhere. And South Asia especially is very different. So I think all these points we need to bear in mind as far as Sri Lanka is concerned.
Right. And speaking of political crisis, let's come back to Pakistan. Yesterday, Pakistan Supreme Court set aside the rejection of the no confidence motion that the opposition had put up against the Imran Khan's PTI government, right? And this was a massive setback for Imran Khan. So what do you think that Imran Khan's PTI would sustain, or what do you think is going to happen in that scenario? Do you think, again, China can somehow intervene in that scenario, or do you think anything?
See, just for our viewers, a few things I'd like to clarify, because there are a lot of misconceptions. First of all, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which is the main bulwark now at this point of time of China-Pakistan cooperation, it came up in the previous PMLN government headed by Nawaz Sharif. Now, China has categorically said it doesn't want to interfere in Pakistan's affairs. That's one. And also, in fact, there are arguments that the pace of the CPEC project was actually better during the last government. And on the CPEC project itself, China has not been very happy with the performance of the current government. And ironically, it is Imran Khan's government, officials in the Imran Khan's government, which immediately after taking over actually questioned CPEC, that the model, financially, that these are unsustainable projects. So they didn't start off on a very good note. And in fact, the Chinese had even warned Imran Khan that, if you want assistance from us, that, you don't make any public statements about the projects and all that. Whereas on the other hand, the progress of the project is much faster during the previous government. So China will ultimately see its economic interests, and it won't invest in one. And they're looking at the CPEC project. Even if tomorrow somebody else comes, they'll have no problem with that. Now this argument is also being made about it is equally ridiculous the argument of the US supporting the opposition, because not for any other reason, but the US may have problems with Imran Khan, but even the opposition, especially the Pakistan Muslim League N, has always had problems with the US. It has not been a
Right.
trust. So the US has basically invested either in the army or in the Pakistan People's Party. That's something which you need to look at. They've had a working relationship with PMLN, but PMLN, in fact, has always been saying that Pakistan needs to reduce its dependence upon the US. And obviously, that was CPEC, closer economic relations with China, was one aspect of it. And PMLN has also been speaking from time to time about the trade linkages with India. So Imran is not the only one who stood up to either, this whole thing about standing up to America, independent foreign policy, all that. The diversification of foreign policy had begun earlier. It's a different thing that they had not totally moved, towards Russia or towards the Chinese camp as it has been done now. It's the circumstances also which are responsible for that. Now, again, so you have political noises which are coming out. There's one school of thought which believes that Imran Khan, by standing up to the US, may benefit, and politically, there'll be sympathy with him. But if you look at the business lobbies in Pakistan in the last week or two, they have expressed concerns about too much duration of ties with the US and EU. Now, why are they dependent upon the US? Obviously, the trade linkages are not so much, but there's scope, because, for instance, last month, officials from both countries held talks also about building trade relations. Current government, the Imran Khan's government itself, spoke about holistic relations with the US, not driven only by security. Then when you're looking at the IMF loan, which is being negotiated, the seventh installment has been stalled for the time being because of crisis. That also the US has an important role to play. Then if you look at FATF, the US has an important role to play. Then when you specifically look at the Russia issue, the Ukraine issue, obviously EU and US are on the same page. And a lot of, if you look at Pakistan's trade links with EU, they're quite strong, especially if you look at exports, cloth and textile exports, large number actually goes to EU. And then the concessions which they have, exemptions, on tariffs of certain goods. That is also that concession has also been given by you. I think that has been reviewed now. Probably till they've got it till 2024. That there were some doubts about that. So there is an argument that the economic relationship of Pakistan needs to be diversified. Obviously, at this point of time, if they're closer to China because of particular posturing, that's fine. But there are other economic relations as well. And if you look at whenever Pakistan has had a foreign exchange crisis, for instance, it's not only China. It's the multilateral institutions. It's Saudi Arabia. It's UAE. They have been helping. Now, Saudi Arabia and UAE, until recently, had very good relations with the US itself. Right? So that's another angle which you need to look at. They were not only doing it because of China. And I think there has also been some sort of back channel also. So Pakistan, the current political crisis is one. Obviously, the immediate cause could be, the foreign policy issues. But there have been economic crisis, and I don't think the whole blame can go to Imran Khan either. But probably there was a gap. It takes time to deliver, and if you just look at it from a purely political perspective, between the promises and the delivery, and probably over the past few weeks, there's a realization that Pakistan is trying to bend ties with the US, but the US, for whatever reason, apart from, obviously, at an official level, there are certain ties, but so the Pentagon reaches out directly to the Pakistan army and those linkages, but probably the level of Biden and Imran Khan, there is that sort of Cold War that, probably Biden still hasn't called Imran Khan. So all that, so then to hedge, Imran Khan took the step of going to Russia. But I don't think it's in the economic sense, it is going to help, because you can't totally dehyphenate your economic interests and foreign policy. They're linked. Right. So I think this could have been done, but in a more, and I think even after doing it, the accusations and that is facing criticisms even within Pakistan. So if you read Dawn, if you read the news, a lot of commentators actually they're taking it to this level and broad. So you can make oblique hints that the US is interfering or whatever, but directly accusing. I mean, obviously that harms your bilateral relationship, and the traditional political parties and the Pakistani military realize that you cannot burn your bridges to this extent, even if you are not getting that sort of financial assistance as you were getting from the US and all, and certainly not with the European Union. So I think it's interesting times. It's going to be interesting to see what the outcome. Once obviously the numbers are not with Imran Khan, so then who will be the successor? That will be important, and this will be for a short period of time, but
Yeah.
very crucial period, I think.
Right, right. And you mentioned cold relationship with Joe Biden. With that, we come to China, obviously. So US has again warned China against thinking about invading Taiwan. So why do you think that US made such an extent at this hour? Because China itself is going through somewhat of an economic crisis due to the COVID outbreak. So why do you think US needed to do that? Like amid the Russia-Ukraine war, it does make sense because obviously Russia made the invasion and China may get some sort of an idea out of it. But do you really think that China was thinking about invading Taiwan at this moment? Why do you think US made such a statement at this moment?
See, the Chinese are even more unpredictable than the Russians. And the sense that, if it in the case of Russia, you can get a whiff. So obviously the US had the intelligence. Yes, I agree with you that probably given the COVID crisis and given the economic challenges at this point of time, it may seem very unlikely that China will go ahead with, but you really can't say anything. But I think it's also US also realizes that the economic situation at this point of China, as we've been discussing in earlier weeks, again due to multiple factors, and now specifically the COVID-19 lockdown, and also especially in the town of in Shanghai, for instance, that has really going to have a major impact on the GDP and everything like that. And I think there's also of late there have been some signs though in the back channel negotiations that, for instance, in US for very long it complained that they didn't have access to the books of Chinese companies. So basically, what in 2020 the US came up with the Holding and Foreign Companies Accountable Act, which was signed into a law. Now, this gave the US Securities and Exchange Commission the power to remove foreign countries of Wall Street if they fail to allow US regulators to review their audits. But what has happened is China has given some indicators that it may provide access to what was sensitive information to the US. So, for instance, because obviously the US and obviously number of Chinese companies have been worried about being delisted from the Wall Street. Now, that is something which it's believed that there could be some progress. China has given hints, and China also, I think, will obviously need to, like, its foreign policy will need to be reoriented, and it also realizes that in a post-COVID world, the EU has largely gone along with the US as far as China is concerned. So, deterioration of further ties with the US means deterioration of ties with the European Union. And I think the US has sensed the challenges that China is facing domestically, and it's trying to leverage on them. But I think even the US should not push this beyond a point. I think there's a certain point to which you push it because they have an opening at this time. The slowdown in the Chinese economy, the challenges, and the fact that even in the Ukraine crisis, as a result of its own interest, China has taken a neutral stance. So I think this needs to be very calibrated. And I think it's a very complex situation. And even I think China probably did not foresee the economic, because otherwise, if it did not have economic challenges, it was in pole position to fill in the space. But it has not. It has been very cautious. Still, apart from the public posturing on the Ukraine crisis, also it has been very cautious. And as we've been pointing out, the divisions there are some serious internal divisions with regard to the economic policies which have been followed. So Xi Jinping cannot. I think he has to also look at the domestic politics, and I doubt whether at this point of time, he'll go ahead with such a big step, which would further create a disruption and impact China's economic interest.
Right. So thank you so much for your inputs today, sir. And a pleasure to have you as always. Please watch Global Chit Chat again next time. Catch us next week. Thank you so much.